Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thursday Talks with Chug. Each week, we cover pressing topics that matter to you and your business. My name is Arianna Gonzalez from Chug Attorneys and CPAs, tuning in from our San Diego office. Please join me in welcoming attorney Jioselin Juarez Contreras from our headquarters in Los Angeles. Hi there, Jioselin, and welcome.
Hello, Ariana. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. For today's topic, we're going to be talking about H-1B, H-4 consular interviews. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started, this conversation is for informational purposes only. It does not create an attorney-client relationship. So if you do have questions, please comment them below or email us anytime at info@chug.com. Jocelyn, can you start by telling us what exactly changed with the Department of State's new directive for the H-1B and H-4 applicants?
Yeah, great question, Ariana. So on December 3rd, Department of State let us know, to attorneys and everybody regarding their new policy on basically online vetting for H-1B and H-4 applicants applying for visa stamping abroad. This policy, when they did the announcement, they did mention that it was going to be effective starting December 15th. So basically, the new directive is basically anybody that was going to apply for a visa abroad at a consulate or embassy for H-1B and H-4 that they were going to have to go through online presence vetting. That basically meant that the officer had the responsibility to do that online presence vetting before they are able to approve a visa for them.
Yeah, this shift does raise an important question about why DOS is strengthening online vetting at this particular time. So can you tell us a little bit about why is DOS expanding online presence vetting now?
So, the Department of State, when they issued this basically new policy update for vetting for H-1B and H-4 visa holders applying for visas, that they mentioned that this is, part of their, idea of being able to, make sure that the visa vetting process is done correctly in interest of the national security of the US. So for them, this is basically a step that should always be included for the vetting of the visa itself. Of course, this is a policy that has come in and has, been a little bit of a change. So of course it could affect processing time. So we'll discuss that later down the road. But, this is part of their security, concern. So that's what their reasoning was.
Mm. And as we dive deeper, I think it's helpful to understand exactly what counts as online presence under these new standards. So, what does online presence include beyond social media?
Yeah, that's a great question. Online presence, like you just said, is not just social media. It could be, a professional website, like, videos we're making right now. So, live. So anything that that person has posted on basically on the web, available in public, could be a something that the officer could consider. It could also be publications. It could also be blogs. It could also be public, LinkedIn profile resumes, right, that you post, anything like that could be reviewed by the officer during their adjudication of the visa itself.
Hmm. And with such broad coverage, I think many applicants are wondering why they're now encouraged to keep certain profiles public. So, why are applicants instructed to make their social media profiles public?
Yeah, that's a great question and popular question now exactly why, social media profiles should be public. Well, I mean, what's happening, from what DOS has posted is basically, this is going to be a portion of the visa process adjudication, right? So it probably will be the last step in the visa approval process, when they're trying to do that. So if the profile is not public or something that the officer wants to review and doesn't have accessibility to review, it of course could, have an effect on the adjudication process of the visa. So the officer may issue, for example, a 221G, which is basically that they need more information before they make a determination on the visa approval. So of course, if those profiles are public, the officer is able to, of course, review the profile quicker, so that there could be an adjudication on the visa for the H-1B or H-4 applicant.
Another important question on that I have is this requirement limited to principal H-1B applicants?
Great question. So, like I just mentioned briefly before, it's not just H-1B applicants, it's also H-4 applicants as well. So H-4s are the derivatives or family members of H-1B principal holders. So it could be spouses and children.
And what about LinkedIn? Does LinkedIn play a role in consular adjudications? If so, what kind of role are we looking at?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, any profile that, is on the World Wide Web, so would be accessible. And LinkedIn is one that probably is the most common that in the era that we live in now that has very high accessibility for anybody that is to search for you, right? So yeah, so that could be a determination by the officer, of course, if there's anything that raises a concern to them or they want to verify, or, when they're doing not just the adjudication of online vetting, but the adjudication of the overall visa process. Anything on that could also be a consideration by the officer as well.
Got it. And beyond employment history, officers are also paying attention to certain kinds of work activities. So, what kinds of prior work activities are drawing heightened scrutiny?
Yeah, so in conjunction to what I just said about the policy update that we've been talking about online vetting presence, basically, the Department of State also did mention on their policy update that something else that officers are to consider is if there's anything that, when they review, for example, prior work history, if there's anything about misinformation, disinformation, online content moderation, online compliance, fact checking. So anything in regards to that could be a consideration. So if you've worked with an employer that may be in that, that could be a consideration. We don't know how that is going to be visibly affecting the visa adjudication process, but that could be a consideration by the officer. Specifically, if that misinformation or disinformation has to relate to speech-related activity, that's, the most consideration that the officer will put into that when they're reviewing, but also any national security considerations, right? So basically, anything of work activities that relate to all that could be considered.
Okay, understood. And can lawful prior employment still create issues at the visa stage, or are we safe there?
Yeah, so we've been talking about online process vetting, speech related, statements in regards to your work, all that. But applicants before this policy still had to consider, their employment history when they were filing the DS-160, which is still a process that they file when they do this visa process first to get issued at the consulates. So of course, anything that you want to make sure that all the information is correct when you're filing. So that means basically, make sure you have all the up-to-date information. Sometimes we don't update our work history or are updated during our promotions, whatever it is, to make sure that, all your data of employment is correct and updated when you're issuing. So yeah, consistency is important for sure. So make sure that anything on that it's updated, but it's always a consideration to make sure all the information that you're provided to you, the Department of State, is always accurate. That's important.
Thank you. And related to this, the DOS has introduced the concept of evaluating potential involvement in censorship. So, what does DOS mean by censorship of protected expression?
Yeah, this was, a little bit of an addition to what we consider. So there has been online vetting for other visa categories before. This was an expansion for H-1B and H-4. The portion that was a little bit of an addition was the censorship of protected expression. A little bit of, what they were basically saying is anything, that is that the applicant, they would review from the applicant that's responsible for any restricting of protected speech in the United States. So that would most likely be under First Amendment, right? So if there's any applicant that had anything about, prohibiting First Amendment, freedom of speech, protected speech, that could be a consideration for the officer, the Department of State officer, when they're adjudicating for potentially finding an ineligibility under the Immigration and Nationality Act.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. I do know a lot of people are probably wondering if they should be cleaning up their profiles, if they should be deleting old things. So, what's your recommendation here? Should applicants remove old photos, posts, profiles before the interview?
Yeah, I mean they shouldn't. I know we have probably old posts that they don't know about or they haven't updated, but it's really not a time where you want to just do that because that could, raise more flags as it is. If there's anything that you want to explain to the officer during the adjudication process, I think that's a great time to explain that. But deleting that could raise more flags than be helpful because if there if there's no social media profile for somebody, I think that's a little bit inaccurate in the world that we live in, right? So you want to make sure you're cognizant that that may not be helpful for the case. You would of course be causing more of a delay on your case. So I would just say if there's anything that concerns you, have speak to the officer during the adjudication process or just provide contents to those posts.
Wonderful insights there. So if you are watching this, please make sure to take this advice into consideration. And Jocelyn, can you tell us what proactive steps should applicants be taking instead?
Yeah, I mean, proactively, like I mentioned just briefly before, on the employment history, accuracy. Accuracy is very important. So make sure that, all your profiles are accurate. If you haven't updated your profile in a while and you have, previous employment but not your accurate employment, very important. Anything that's fake descriptions, make sure they are accurately, clear descriptions of your profile as well. And be prepared to explain if they're like it's just said briefly before anything that you want to give context to or that you want to give context about your trajectory of your employment. Be able to have that conversation. Of course, during an interview, you don't have a lot of time to speak with the officer, because they do a lot of interviews throughout the day, but make sure that if that is something of concerns, you do come prepared at the onset on during the visa interview process.
And how has this new vetting affected visa interview scheduling, if it has at all?
Yeah, so it has already started affecting. So as soon as that policy came into play, some consulates started issuing cancellation of interviews. Some posted and they were rescheduling for a couple months out. So basically, they did give them a rescheduled time, the applicants a rescheduled time a few months out, just so that they could allow for sufficient time to, after the interview with an applicant, have the time to then review the online presence of that applicant because it's gonna, of course, it takes potentially an additional time on top of the regular process and the officers do before this policy. So yeah, some consulates have started rescheduling times out for a few months. So that has started.
And how significant are these delays? I know you said some of them have been rescheduled several months out. Is there anything we need to be aware of on how significant people should be prepared for?
Yeah, so I don't have like case by case specifics, but we have been hearing from certain post um of post, that we've been hearing from other practitioners and as well. So is that basically for some consulates, specifically in India, they've been rescheduling some from this month up until I believe it's March. In June as far out. So it's been happening. Unfortunately, it's been happening. And it could continue. We don't know if this is just, because it's just started, the policy just started this month, or if it will continue. But of course, that is a consideration as well, because, a lot of applicants do have a hard time finding an interview date as it is. So they want to make sure they're very up to date, make sure the consulate has your right email address where they could contact you so that you don't travel and then you find out you don't have an interview anymore, especially because you're not going to be able to travel back in. So you want to make sure you're very up to date, searching the posts to see what they're doing, if there's anything. Talking to your attorney if your attorney is in context on your visa process for the consulate part, asking questions to them to see what they know, as well. So in that delay, in that regards, yeah, delays are being pushed out for interviews and it will likely continue.
Okay, good to know. And can you tell us if these delays are limited to India or?
Yeah, so I know I mentioned India because several of our clients are from India, but other concepts have also rescheduled as well. We have heard the post in Ireland and a post in Vietnam have also rescheduled, canceled and rescheduled appointments. Again, it is possible that more consulate will do this as well because, of course, this is a change that they will have to implement to make sure that they have sufficient officers available for the whole visa process implementing this policy in place.
And what happens if an applicant were to appear on their original appointment date? Do they need to be concerned about this? Any heads up here?
Yeah, so if the consulate actually schedules your appointment, they're not gonna see you that day. So that's the reason I just said earlier before you want to make sure that you're looking at they have your right email, everything's up to date so that you are getting updates correctly. They're not gonna see you. A lot of consulates, aside from the actual interview appointment, they have a biometrics appointment. Those are not being affected if you have that. But of course, the situation becomes you might still have the biometrics, but then your actual interview is far out in date. So then you want to make sure you're, acknowledging that if you do that, you're going to have to wait for that amount of time, right, abroad. So you want to make sure if you do get canceled for the actual interview, that you also try to see if you could reschedule the biometrics if you don't want to be waiting that long abroad.
Yeah, really important points. And if you are watching this and have questions or you need help with this process, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to connect you with Jioselin and she can help you out. So, what about for rescheduling, Jioselin? Can applicants freely reschedule to an earlier date? What does that look like?
Yeah, so that's actually not just a popular question for the time being now for the online vetting, but it's also been a common question before that. But rescheduling, basically, it depends on the website for the most part on how you're going to reschedule, right? So you should have the accessibility to reschedule for for almost all appointments, but for this one specifically, yes, you get to reschedule. You only get to reschedule once for the most part, unless there are extraordinary or circumstances for that. But you get to do it once. Your visa fee, when you pay for the interview, of course, you pay the fee. You want to make sure that if you reschedule an appointment either in a certain day before or after, that your visa is still going to be the visa fee will still be available that hasn't expired. So make sure that also is in line of that. But yes, but the situation now is, of course, if there's canceling a lot of appointments, there may be a limited availability of appointments either further in or further out. So you want to make sure you also understand that part as well.
Could you tell us about the risks that applicants may face if they travel abroad for stamping?
Yeah, I mean, there's always been a situation where you stamp, there could be a longer, there could always be a delay, by the time that the officer sees you for the visa to adjudication, just because we need additional documentation, anything like that. So that is still something that the individual should be cognizant about. With this online vetting, of course, we expect that there is a possibility for longer processing, which basically means that there will be potentially outside the US for a longer amount of time. So they have to be in conversation with their employer so that they could understand there is a possibility that they may happen. So there could be an employment disruption. So all of that should be understood as well.
Got it. And what should employers do when employees are impacted?
Yeah, I mean, they should, you know, because of the change, there should always be a conversation before they travel out on what can happen. You want to prepare if there is a delay on what, the employer side of it will look like if they're able to, um, you know, give them the timeout, sorry, not the timeout, the time off during that time that they're out, or if they are going to do remote option for work or whatever it is, they have to have that conversation with them. But the most important thing is having a contingency plan for if, the worst case scenario happens that there is a delay with the visa stamping. There is no surprise basically at the far end of that.
Wow, really important information. I want to ask you one more question, Jioselin. Thank you so much for all of this amazing information. What is the most important takeaway for H-1B and H-4 applicants today?
Yeah, with the policy that literally just, started, being implemented, the main thing is, of course, that, they are accurate about I keep saying accurate because it's very important. You want to make sure there's no vagueness to your online presses, make sure you're clear, make sure you're accurate on everything, make sure you're transparent on everything. Don't digitally wipe everything. That's not the solution. And make sure you're very up to date on your post. Make sure your updated data is updated with the scheduling system so that you get emails about the interview. And then make sure you're really cognizant that there may be a delay from what you're expecting from before usually after you get approved, normally not always, it should become a few days to a week, 2 weeks to get your passport back with the visa issue, but that could be a little bit different now with the policy in place, vetting, higher possibility of issuing 221Gs, which is a notice, like I mentioned earlier, for additional documentation before final adjudication for the visa issuance. So basically be very cognizant, up to date, speak with your attorney if you have one, so that you make sure you're up to date on the policy being implemented and see if there's any changes at the post that you're going to.
Wow, thank you so much, Jocelyn, for taking the time to answer all of our questions on this topic. I know things are always changing, so we appreciate you taking the time to come and break things down for us. That is all we have time for today, so this brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. A special thank you to you, Jocelyn, for taking the time. To stay up to date, please subscribe and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Send us an email if you have any questions or suggestions. Let us know what topic you want to see next, and make sure to join us back here next week for more pressing topics that truly matter to you and your business. Until next time, stay safe and take care, everyone. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.